Carole, welcome back as usual with another lovely book, and this looks like a most enticing book for anybody who's ever thought they'd like to go to Paris.
Yes, it is. It's a book we sell a lot of in the women's bookshop, and it's totally delightful. I found it enchanting. John Baxter, who's written it, it's called The Most Beautiful Walk in the World, and its subtitle is A Pedestrian in Paris. And John Baxter, who's written it, is an author. He's Australian, but he's married to a French woman, and he's lived in Paris for more than 20 years now. Right. His daughter was born and grew up in Paris and so on. So he's an Australian, but he has a real knowledge of Paris and a great love and appreciation of Paris, and particularly the literary aspects of Paris. So he does take people on literary walks around Paris and takes you to the Luxembourg Gardens, for example, where some of the writers hung out, particularly Gertrude Stein. He takes you to the cafes like Le Deux Magots, where Hemingway would meet up with Scott Fitzgerald. Right. So a lot of reference to the famous writers, the American writers in particular, who were there in the 20s, and with a bit of Picasso and other people thrown in.
Yes, I can say that it had to be a whole lot of art as well.
Strolling around the streets in the 1920s. It's written in very tiny chapters, so very short, just 3 or 4 pages each, and he interlaces it really with little anecdotes, some of which are personal. Like it starts off with this hilarious story about when he was first there, he thought all French people could cook, and he discovers that in fact his French family are academics and literary and so on, his wife's family, and none of them cook. And he, John Baxter, this Australian Antipodean, is a great cook, and so he learns to cook French food. There's a very funny story at the beginning about them locking themselves out of their apartment when they're about to go for Christmas dinner, and they're preparing the goose or whatever it is they're going to cook, and the stuffing's got to be right. In the end, his wife has to go without him while he stays behind to deal with the locksmith, and he has to sort of give the French family instructions over the phone about how to cook the meal. So there's personal stories, but he actually takes you on this walk and points out the cafes, the parks, the landmarks that were visited by famous writers and people who've lived in Paris over the years. And there's lovely bits of history all the way through. Right. It goes back to the French Revolution and all little tidbits of history, and you just get this lovely sense of peacefully walking. He stresses the fact that Paris is a place to walk in.
Yes, yeah.
And so he takes you down the little passage, all the little cobbled alleyways that have got wonderful old stores and old shops and.
Yes. I've only spent the tiniest amount of time in Paris, nowhere near enough, but it did strike me as being an immensely walkable city. And I just love the little surprises there, like you go around a corner and overhead is an old building with the gargoyle that the rainwater comes out of. And, I mean, those amazing French touches.
All over Notre Dame, particularly.
Of course, yes, but even in an ordinary little road, you can come across such visual delights, can't you?
Yeah, so he points out some of the most beautiful buildings to look at, and particularly the ones that are famous because famous people spent time there.
It's a good size too, isn't it? I mean, you could poke that into a corner of a suitcase quite well, couldn't you, as you took off for Paris, so which is sort of pretty much everybody's dream if they've never been there, isn't it? Is to at least once to go to Paris.
And I think it's a lovely, lovely guide. You could follow where he tells you to go and have a wonderful time, just exploring all the little nooks and crannies he tells you about.
And just sort of kind of easier, really, than downloading an app and struggling to read it in the sun and all of that sort of thing on a screen. So excellent stuff.
Quite enjoyable and delightful.
Thank you so much, Carole Beu.